And I bring you greetings from Not Church. Now, it's a name that definitely causes people to do a double take. And some of those people do a double take and go, ooh. And others do a double take and go, And what I found as I have shared about Not Church with people literally around the world, I support myself as a freelance photographer and writer and do much of that with the Peace USA. And as I've had the opportunity to talk with folks in Japan, in Taiwan, in Kenya, in Lebanon, and in Egypt, amongst them, about this Not Church, I've gotten a lot of this. And it often comes with something like, I might be interested in that, but I don't want people to hear I'd get in trouble. Or maybe, I think my husband would really like that. This sense of, maybe there's something interesting, but I don't know that I could say it out loud. I might get in trouble. And I was glad to be reminded this morning of one of my, actually my favorite part of the Book of Order that I encountered in seminary, which I have to say I didn't expect to like the Book of Order that much. I had only heard sort of jokes about it up until that point. But my favorite part when I was studying in polity, that we are called to be the provisional demonstration of what God intends for all humanity, and that we are called to do that in such a way that we are willing to even risk our own existence in order to bring that about. And so this morning, what I would love to do is share with you a little bit about this Not Church, which is a community and a gathering and made up of atheists and agnostics and Buddhists and Jews and religiously Jewish, spiritually satsangis and former you fill in the blanks. And of course, an ordained Presbyterian evangelist. But before we get started, and since it's kind of early on a Saturday morning, I thought that I would introduce us to the topic with a little bit of a clip from a commentary on living in a changing world and living in a culture that is, as you experience it, shifting, and you're trying to find your way. It is, of course, a clip from Downton Abbey. And I have to give you a spoiler alert, because this is actually the first episode of season 4, which is not yet available in the US, but on Sunday evening aired in the UK. Now, don't worry, I'm not really going to give much away, because one of the sort of storylines in this particular episode has to do with Mrs. Patmore, the cook. Now, Mrs. Patmore has been the cook forever. It's what she was trained to be. It's who she was trained to be. It's what she knows how to do. And she has a young assistant named Daisy. Enter a newfangled contraption. This newfangled contraption gets delivered to Downton Abbey, and Mrs. Patmore doesn't even know what to do with it. What is it? But her young assistant, Daisy, greets it with excitement and anticipation. It is, of course, a set of electric beaters. Now, Mrs. Patmore is convinced that whatever this thing does or doesn't do is going to ruin the dinner. And so the night that Daisy uses these electric beaters to make the family's mousse, Mrs. Patmore has a backup plan. Because she's sure, and she's probably actually a little bit hoping, that Daisy's newfangled contraption is going to fail. Well, it doesn't fail. In fact, the family raves about the mousse. And Mrs. Patmore is left feeling like she might be left behind. And so she decides to do what needs to be done and take matters into her own hands. And late one night, in the kitchen alone, she decides she's going to figure this thing out. That's where we enter our episode.
What in God's name? I must have put those ruddy prongs in wrong. You did something wrong. What a day this has turned out to be. Why?
Nanny West has been sacked. So that's fun for tomorrow.
Well, I'll get the sack if anyone sees this.
Let Daisy and Ivy clean it up in the morning.
But Daisy mustn't find out I don't know how to work it.
Why ever not?
Because it makes her part of the future and leaves me stuck in the past. Don't you see?
Oh, fetch me an apron. We'll do it together.
Would you really?
Why not? Who needs sleep?
Thank you. Oh. I was never sure I liked her.
Nanny West. Huh? It's not for me to have an opinion. I will say this.
The key phrase in that clip was Mrs. Patmore admitting that she couldn't tell Daisy what she had been doing. Why not? Because it makes her part of the future and it leaves me in the past. And I wonder for us in the church, for we who find ourselves in the church, if we don't sort of have that sort of subtle, maybe at night we can try and see how to work this newfangled contraption because we're really afraid that maybe we are being left and something else is the future. And so what I wonder in our time here together today is if we might, like Mrs. Hughes, take on the apron and clean up this mess together, not hiding in our fear, but joining together as fellow travelers on this journey into the future. This is an image from London. It says, "Think like a bird flies." Of course, right? I feel like these conversations about where the church is headed and what we can do and how we can be different sometimes leaves us shaking our heads. Think like a bird flies. What? What do you mean? It can seem almost overwhelming to wonder how we might shift in order to meet the world that is unfolding before us. A recent article about the rise of the nuns, those who check nun on a list of religious preference, says that although something like 7% of people were born into sort of not religious families, more than or close to 20% of folks would claim that as their own preference. Those folks are young and old, and those folks are meeting other folks in that same category and having families that then will be what? Now, for some, this can seem terrifying. And for others, it is a wide open invitation. And so what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of the backstory of how I came to be pastor to a group of such spiritual but not religious. In fact, even yesterday on Facebook, I had a conversation with one of our not church members where he was disagreeing with a quote from Richard Rohr. And he was basically saying all of religion, the not church person was, all of religion is used for social control. It's spirituality that we need to be about. Now, Richard Rohr, of course, would have different ways of describing this and have different categories. But these folks with pretty strong opinions are the folks that make up what we would call the congregation of not church, although we definitely don't use that word. The backstory starts just about a decade ago. And in the fall of 2003, after graduating from seminary, I happened to be living in St. Andrews, Scotland for the year. And while I was there, I heard a presentation by the man who was then the head of what they call New Charge Development for the Church of Scotland. Now, to be honest, in 2003, I thought, the Church of Scotland has New Church Development? Looking around at all the beautiful but old buildings, it seemed sort of hard to fathom. But Peter Nielsen was in charge of this new look about what the Church of Scotland might do. And they came up with a document called the Church Without Walls. And at this presentation, he presented that document and some of their findings and this cutting-edge stuff that they were doing. Now, for folks familiar with Fresh Expressions actually in England came out of or was related to that document in Scotland. But during the whole series of presentations, Peter Nielsen said one thing that really stuck with me and that I couldn't get out of my head. He said, we need to be prepared to go to where the people are. And of course, everyone knew what the and was going to be, and get them to come back here. I mean, how do you fill your old church without going and getting them and bringing them back, right? No, he said we need to be prepared to go to where the people are and to stay there. And it launched in my mind because I thought, I wonder what that looks like. I mean, okay, go to where the people are and stay there, but eventually don't we need to get them to come back in here? I mean, isn't that the point? How else are we going to pay the light bill? But it stuck with me and it just sort of planted itself in my thinking, and I wondered, what might that look like? Around that same time, I had the opportunity to go hear this author that I had just found out about, hadn't really heard much about, but he was doing a presentation in London. His name is Brian McLaren. I've since heard quite a bit about him. But Brian McLaren at that presentation said something else that just lodged in my mind. And he said this. He said, what if we started with the premise that God is already at work in the world? How would that change how we view our ministry, our mission, our life together as a church? Now, today we may have heard this, but in 2003, that was sort of a crazy revolutionary concept for me. I had seen my share of mission trip T-shirts taking Jesus from Texas to the Dominican Republic, as if Jesus could fit in your carry-on. But what if we assumed that God was already at work? How would that change how we approach our mission and our ministry? After I came back from Scotland, I was in the call process before I left. I was ready to receive a call. I was an overachiever. I'd done everything. I passed my ords. I got, all the checks checked off. And then nothing. Nothing the next year, nothing the next year. I interviewed with churches, and they were wonderful people, but nothing really fit. We would leave going, you're great. No, you're great. Yeah, but we don't need to be together. The CPM during that time called me in for a meeting, and they said, we hate to tell you, but you are about to be put in this category called languishing in the process. Do you have something to say for yourself? To which I said, oh, please put me in that category. It will make such a good story. That might not have been the best answer. But it was during that time of languishing that I started spending time in this little community in Baja. Now, the reason that community and that place is because my grandmother used to live there. So it's a place that I've been since I was a baby, but had never actually lived. My grandmother's contemporaries had long since passed, and there were new folks living in this community in the houses around. And so I started spending more and more time in her house and got to know the neighbors. And I needed to make a living, so I started to spend more and more time doing work for the presbytery. And I got to know my presbytery neighbors, languishing in the process. And during that languishing and this time of lingering, those seeds that had been planted, that seed of go to where the people are and stay there, and that seed of what if God is already at work? Those seeds began to take root. Now, I didn't know this at the time, and if you want confirmation of that, Steve Yamaguchi, our executive presbyter, is here, and he could tell you, I didn't have this great vision of it's all going to turn out. I was frustrated. I was frustrated. Why is it taking so long? Lingering, it can sound good, but then it can sound lazy after a while. I was an overachiever. I had everything ready to go. But during that languishing and during that lingering, I also had the opportunity to do quite a bit of listening. Listening to these new neighbors in the community around my grandmother's house. And one evening I got invited to dinner. And we're sitting around the table and we're just chatting. We're neighbors sharing a meal together. And all of a sudden, one of my neighbors, Kathy, says to me, "So, Erin, how is that minister thing going anyway?" Now, that minister thing was what they called what I was doing, just hanging out in the community. They all knew I was trying to become a minister, but they didn't exactly know why I wasn't actually one yet. And so I tried to explain. I said, in the Presbyterian church, there's a call process. So I can't just be a minister. I have to be called by a community. And she, without missing a beat, says, "Why don't we call you?" I said, "Well, why would you call me a minister? You don't want anything to do with church or organized religion. What need do you have for a minister? Why would you call me?" She goes, "We know you. We like you. Why don't we call you?" The nuns. N-O-N-E-S. These people who are probably never going to be in this space with us. Maybe they will someday, but maybe they never will. It can be easy to blame them for their lack of attendance in our pews. It can be easy to say, they must be selfish. They want to sleep in on a Sunday morning. Oh, you know those people. They just pick and choose whatever they want to believe. If they were really committed, they would be in here. Now, we probably don't do that out loud, but it can be easy to suddenly think the problem must be theirs. Because if it's not theirs, might it be ours? But I wonder if it's not a problem at all, but an opportunity and an invitation for us to enter a new way of being as a church in the world. The world that Jesus loves, that God created, that the Spirit is sustaining. So some months after this dinner, I was ordained by the Los Ranchos Presbytery. Now, there was a lot of COM meetings that happened in that intervening time, and we could talk about that. But I was ordained as a partnership of churches from within the presbytery came together to say, we are willing to experiment and we are willing to try something different. And so we're going to ordain you and send you to this community to be based there, to travel the world, and then to bring the learnings back to us within the presbytery. And we're going to do that without a 5-year plan, without a vision statement, without any set of goals or number of, conversions, number of spiritual services you have to have started. We are just going to experiment. Now, for someone like me, that is wonderful. That is freedom, and that is joy, and that is the ability to cross-pollinate these worlds and to see what might come of that. But not long after my ordination, I thought, I'm ordained now. Shouldn't I do something? It was okay to linger and listen all that time while I was languishing. But now I'm ordained. I'm a reverend. It's time for me to do something. And so I had this sense of, I don't know what to do, but I think I should do something. And again, I sought the wisdom of Steve Yamaguchi, who asked me just very simply, what have you done up to this point? I said, well, I've pretty much been listening. Oh, maybe I should keep listening. It just kind of went like that. And so I continued to listen within the community. And not long into that listening, some members of the community came to me. We had actually had Christmas and Easter services in the community for a few years. And some folks came and they said, you know, we really like those, but do you think we might meet more often than twice a year? No. No. So we began to meet monthly in what was called the Spiritual Conversation Group, an eclectic group of folks. Atheist Jew, atheist Catholic, excommunicated Jehovah's Witness, Buddhist, science of the mind, Presbyterian. And anything was fair game as long as it was spiritual. And whoever picked the topic got to lead the discussion. So we talked about the Good Samaritan, the Golden Rule, forgiveness, life after death, energy, what all religions have in common or not, meditation. And after about a year of this, some of them began to say, you know, Erin, we know that you preach in the U.S. at churches. We were wondering, would you preach for us? I said, you mean right now? They said, no, like some sort of service. I said, what would that look like? We don't really know, but do you think you might do that? Why not? So as the time came closer for this, we set a date. It was in January of 2012, and the date approached, and I was speaking with this spiritual conversation group. I said, okay, you know, I'm happy to do this. I'm happy to put it together. I'm not going to do all the work, so you all are going to help. I just want you to know. But there's a couple things I'm running into issues with, and I need your help with those. First, I don't want to be the evangelist inviting people to a religious service. I've worked really hard to not be that kind of person in the neighborhood. So you all are going to do the inviting. Oh yeah, no problem. We'll totally do it. Okay, good. The next issue that I'm thinking we're going to run into is when you say, hey, neighbor, would you like to come to, what are we going to call it? Will we call it church? Oh, no. I think that was from Nadine, our atheist Jew. Oh, no, we are not going to call it church. So what should we call it? And someone in the group, I don't even remember who, said not church. And so it stuck. Now, we didn't intend for it to sound negative. I know some people say, why do you call yourselves what you're not rather than what you are? The thing is, for those who come to not church, this doesn't sound negative. It's actually very positive. Because not church for them means a space that is open and welcoming, where you don't have to believe anything, but you can believe something, where everybody is welcomed and everybody is invited to make a contribution from wherever they come. Now, it is highly contextualized. And if you don't believe that context matters, I will read this sign for you. You can see that at the top it's sort of a run-down, kind of apartment-esque building with kind of a ratty front yard. And it's a for sale by owner, $3.95 million. No brokers, serious inquiries only. You see, if you turn around, this is the view in the other direction. Context matters. So when we set about to have a service for people who wanted nothing to do with religion or church, but wanted a service that was spiritual, we had to contextualize it. Now, we started based on a Presbyterian order of worship, which you would never know if you came and attended not church gathering today. But we did start based on that. We have something that started out as the prayer of confession. It's now turned into a time of meditation. We had something that started as the passing of the peace that's now turned into a little story on the theme for the day. We had music. Initially, we sang Amazing Grace because it was the only hymn that everyone could agree on and no one was offended by. But you can only sing Amazing Grace so many times. What we landed on was one of our neighbors who plays at the local cantina. He plays cover songs, and he, I think, calls himself an atheist. And I tell him, okay, Ross, the theme for this month is compassion. And Ross shows up and he has decided what songs will show that theme. Kathy started out doing the passing of the peace, which is morphed into this little minute for mission on the theme of the day. I say, okay, Kathy, the theme is compassion. And she wrestles with that theme, and then she comes back and presents. Ron, the religiously Jewish but spiritually satsangi, does the meditation for us. And a variety of other people do readings, do a blessing, or a welcome. It's very, very contextualized to that group. But what happens is we've got anywhere from 5 to 8 people in the community, part of the community, wrestling with a theme for usually the 2 weeks preceding our gathering. And we don't meet together to make sure everything's going to flow right. We don't actually talk together at all about the service before it happens. We show up. We happen to meet Sunday mornings at 11, which people think is funny. We show up Sunday morning, and we offer what it is that is the fruit of that wrestling. And I have to tell you, every time I am amazed. Because I believe that God is already at work in the world. But do I really? Because you kind of want to make sure things fit together. You want to make sure no one's going to say anything crazy. You want to make sure, it's fit for prime time. We have a lot of swearing, by the way. That's our context. But if I believe that God is already at work, then is it possible that the Spirit might work amongst the not-church? The recent article on the rise of the nuns talks about the blurring of the lines between religious and non-religious. See, we're a little bit different than the New Atheist movement or the other sort of godless community movements because we have folks that are very committed to their practice of faith, their belief in God, their following of Jesus. And we have other folks that are very committed to not buying a bunch of what they see as mumbo-jumbo in an old book. Together, we deepen our spirituality and we journey on that path. It's collaborative, it's open. It's a little risky, I have to say. What does it look like to go to where the people are and stay there? When I first heard that, I assumed it was a geographical statement. So leave this building and go out there somewhere and stay there. And even when I started my time in La Mission, I still kind of assumed it was a geographical thing. But as Not Church has unfolded, what I have come to learn is that it's not only a geographical statement, but what does it look like to be willing to go to where the people are? Religiously, spiritually, and stay there. And from that point, journey together. Now that will turn your mind in some knots. And I can tell you that I know that people would assume that since I'm the evangelist, I am there to convert these not church folks. But I have to tell you that they are actually in the midst of converting me. Why? Because I am seeing God at work. I am following Jesus on this path. And it's blowing me away. It's not that I didn't know it was possible. It's just I acted as though maybe it was up to me. There is a term in the discipline of permaculture called edge. Now, I think it can be so easy for us in the midst of change, in the midst of shift, in the midst of demographics and empty pews and we've got to make the budget. It can be so easy to want to come into the center and sort of circle the wagons. But edge, as a concept, is that place that's not center. Edge is where two systems meet. It's where a forest meets the field. It's where the ocean meets the coast. It's where an estuary meets the shore. In permaculture, if you want to increase the vitality of your system, you want to increase edge. Edge, where those two systems come into contact, is where all of the energy is in a system. And so I wonder for us, as we feel this desire to circle the wagons, what it might look like for us to instead push outward to those edges in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our circle of friends, in our circle of neighbors. This is a screenshot from the Not Church website. Our website was done by Nadine, our atheist Jew, and she chose that image. It's an image of the waves hitting the coast. That is an image of edge. Now, we in Not Church are edge in a lot of different ways. We are primarily Americans, but we are also Thai and South African and a host of other things, and Mexican friends as well, living outside of our country. But we are also religious edge because we're all these things bouncing up against each other. Now, you could say, how in the world do you have anything in common? How do you worship in that context? How do you deepen? Isn't it just going to be chicken soup for the spiritual but not religious soul? And I wonder if that's not what the leaders in Jerusalem asked Peter when he came back from his visit with Cornelius. You know, that visit to the centurion, the God-fearer, but not Jewish. When Peter had his world turned upside down by that vision of a sheep being lowered, and oh my gosh, what I thought it meant to be faithful is actually not at all what it means to be faithful. I wonder if that's not what Paul and his companions felt there in Philippi, not in the city center, but out by the river, with a group of women, foreign women who pressed their hospitality upon Paul and his companions. I wonder if that's not how the exiles felt when Jeremiah's word said, plant gardens, marry, have your sons and daughters marry, and seek the peace of this place and the prosperity. It's a shift. When I've told the Not Church folks that I'm speaking to church people, and what might they have to say to the church, I would remind them to frolic in the beauty of God's creation, to feed and clothe the poor, to protect the weak, heal the sick, and all the rest, as both Rabbi Hillel and Jesus said, is commentary. That's from the Not Church. This from Ross, our musician. Popular music has always expressed relevant ideas, spiritual and political, and I like being able to speak through that voice as I'm comfortable with it. I firmly believe that the universe itself gives us innumerable clues as to why we should be good and do good. If that's an atheist, I guess I'm one. And this from Kathy, who calls herself an atheist Catholic, but has wondered as of late if that fits still. In her sharing this past gathering, she said, I'm pretty sure that it's God, even though I'm not sure I'm ready to use that word. To go to where the people are and stay there, assuming that God is already at work in the world. Of course, you need to go with your eyes open. With your eyes open to say, what do you see? This is a picture at our local cantina. It's called Splash because of the splash. I took this picture and posted it just thinking, oh, it's a great shot of the splash. Not thinking anything else until people on Facebook and Instagram started saying, wow, there's an angel there. I think it's our role as people of the church seeking to impact our world to be the ones to say, did you see there's an angel there? I mean, I'm just kind of pointing that out. That first gathering we had of Not Church, I thought, how in the world am I going to... I give the sermon, that's my role. how in the world am I supposed to give a sermon that's not religious? I wasn't prepared for this in seminary. We typically preach from a text and make a lot of assumptions about what we consider authoritative or not. I was kind of stumped. And then I thought, well, what did Jesus do? Jesus told a lot of stories about everyday life. Maybe I should follow Jesus. And so I started that gathering with a story about tomatoes, describing my first encounter with that delicious garden grown, fresh from the garden, ripened on the vine, and straight to the dinner table. That taste that was like nothing I had ever tasted before. And wanting more of that, in January, I went to the supermarket and got this thing called tomato and brought it home and sliced it up and had it for dinner and took a bite and almost spit it out because it was bland and cardboard and there was no flavor to it. And so as we began that first Not Church, I offered to those gathered that though their experience with organized religion, tomato, might have been not tasting so good to them, that doesn't necessarily mean we need to throw out the entire category called tomato. What we need to find is that locally grown, fresh from the vine, full of flavor, taste. They're both called tomato, but they are worlds apart. People have asked me, why not church? To which I have begun to respond, why not church?